Hi guys, so today I'm going to be focusing on character, which perhaps in some ways is an odd area to focus on in regards to game books, where the focus is usually exploration and picking paths. But if you've watched my earlier choices video, then you'll understand how important it is to throw the reader into interesting and challenging situations, and character can feed into that in a pretty powerful way. I'm going to break down this video into 3 stages. Firstly, I want to look at the player character. So this is the character that the reader will be playing throughout the book and making choices for. Then I'll move on to NPCs, so non-player characters, i.e. the other characters in the book that the reader will meet and interact with. And finally, I want to look at environment and how that essentially is your third character. And when handled well, it can really help to drive your narrative and immerse your reader in the world that you have created. So let's start with the player character. Now, when game books first started out back in the day, by and large, the player character was a nameless, faceless, blank slate. Pretty much a sort of avatar that the reader could project their own visualization onto, allowing them very much to imagine the character that they wanted them to be. So with this approach, which is still popular, there is a simplicity to it. The reader simply just names their hero or character and then just heads straight into the story, job done. Perhaps they know a couple of things about their character, as in terms of like their background. Maybe they're told that they're a sellsword, an adventurer, perhaps a private investigator. But other than those basics, the character is, as I said before, like a complete blank canvas. So that approach is great if you want the minimum of fuss. You want to get the player into the story and let them get exploring. But one thing to consider, and one way to add some flavour to this kind of approach, is to give the reader some initial options to help customise their character and to make them feel a little bit more unique. This might include like picking a background for their character, which could then potentially influence some of the choices and situations they get themselves into throughout the story. Or it might involve choosing skills and abilities, perhaps allocating points to show mastery in different areas, maybe alchemy, lockpicking, persuasion, medicine, religion, whatever is relevant to your world setting. So in many ways, this will be very similar to how you might craft a character at the start of a RPG campaign. In my experience, that approach seems to be the popular one for game books, and it is always well received, where players, to an extent, have a kind of blank canvas, but also can sort of, imprint their own imagination and choices onto their character to craft them and make them feel unique. There is another approach, which is to give the reader a pre-made character. So this might be a named character that already comes with their own background, appearance, potentially personality traits. So this would be like, say, playing Tomb Raider and taking control of Lara Croft. So the reader is essentially taking on a specific character and guiding them through the narrative. Of course, you can still have some customization with skills, but the reader won't be able to kind of put their own character into the story. They're being given one. So to give an example, I actually did this with The Eye of Winter's Fury, which is my third book in the series. In this book, I had Prince Aaron as the main character. I did this because it worked for the narrative and the story that I wanted to tell, and it also allowed me to give a greater depth to some of the kind of interactions and choices. I think the reception initially was a little bit mixed on this. I know some people didn't like having a character imposed on them, whilst others enjoyed, the situations and the story beats that this created as they led this specific character on quite a dramatic story arc. That said, though, obviously with DestinyQuest, they still got to customize their character throughout the story with different abilities and equipment. So in some ways, they were still able to kind of craft Prince Aaron into the character that they wanted to play. So that kind of does appease that aspect of giving somebody a specific pre-built character. So in short, really, what I'm probably saying is always give the reader, stroke player, some choices over their character so that they can feel that they have ownership of them. And the obvious ways of doing that is to give them maybe a selection of different backgrounds that they could choose from and or abilities and skills. And all these can really, help them to give them ownership of their character. But also think about the fact that, as a writer, this provides many cool opportunities to bring these things into your story and reward or punish readers for their choices that they make. So let's consider NPCs, so non-player characters. Now, with game books, it can be easy to fall into the trap of having quite one-dimensional characters. And that's largely due to the fact that, we want to keep the pace of the narrative flowing. We want to drive the reader into their next set of choices. We don't necessarily really want to bog players down in too much heavy dialogue and interactions. So there is a tendency at times, I'm guilty of this, which I'll come to, is that NPCs can sometimes just be there just to serve a narrative purpose. Like the merchant who, is just there to sell items, the quest giver that needs help, the seasoned traveller that is just there to give some little rumours or hints. And that is all fine. In some ways, as I said, I fell into this trap. For Legion of Shadow, I didn't know too much better. It's kind of the approach that I took. And probably based off my own experiences of playing multiplayer online RPGs and some of the early game books I played. But when it came to book 2 and my other books in the series, one of the areas I felt I really wanted to improve on was my handling of character. And as I got more skilled at this, I came to a better appreciation of how the characters of the story can make for some really interesting interactions and choices. So one of the key things I always keep in mind when introducing a character into one of my game books is how do they challenge my reader? If you were to do any screenwriting course, or if you were to study a screenplay, a film script, you'll know that characters should pretty much always play off the main character and add drama. So perhaps they might have an opposing view, a different outlook, they might be being obstructive, they may get the hero into situations they don't want to be in. So when it comes to a game book, these things kind of get interesting because these interactions and these characters can feed into the decisions that your reader will have to make. So, for example, perhaps the reader might need to decide if they trust a particular character. Will they listen to a certain character's advice? Will they let them lead at a certain point? Will the reader side with that character in a difficult circumstance? Or perhaps the reader might even have to make even more difficult choices, like who do they choose to save at a certain point from certain death? Or who do they oppose and then risk making an enemy of? So you can see how characters can throw up a host of challenging choices and situations for your reader. In my introduction video, I talked about The Walking Dead by Telltale Games, which really helped me hone this skill of writing good characters. And it really is kind of a bit of a masterclass in this sort of style of writing. So I do recommend it once again, checking that out. It's really useful. All this comes down to you as the writer having fun with your characters and playing with your readers' expectations and assumptions. And, we can do this by, we can describe a character's appearance and their physical traits. We can give some, the way they talk and they act, their general manner. We can make them perhaps like kind and considerate, or maybe cocky and a bit annoying. Perhaps we portray them as a know-it-all that really kind of grates on your patience and tolerance. But just think about how you can make each character memorable and unique through their quirks and their flaws. And then all that feeds into making interesting choices, because a reader's choices will be influenced by these little nuggets of information that we provide. So, take an example, do they choose to trust this scruffy old man who reeks of stale wine but seems to know more than he lets on? Or maybe do they listen to the charming lady who clearly has connections and wealth but is definitely hiding something from her occasional nervous manner? So you can see how you can just tweak characters and give them like flaws and quirks, and put your reader in difficult circumstances where they're challenged and have to really think about how they personally interact with these characters. So finally, I want to touch on environment. So whether it's a monster-filled dungeon, a spooky forest, a haunted mansion, a secret laboratory, whatever environments you're placing the reader in, on a very sort of top level, think about how you are portraying it and potentially using your environment to build tension. Do we want our readers to feel on edge? Do we want to ramp up the tension at certain points, hint at dangers or hazards, making the reader, consider their actions and their choices very carefully? In my introductory video, I referenced a game called Firewatch. Part of why I loved this game and why I recommend that you try it out is its powerful and expert use of environment. So in the game, you're essentially a forest ranger. You're acting alone in the Wyoming wilderness. The game does a fantastic job of heightening that sense of isolation and uneasiness. This comes from, the environment itself. You're in this remote wilderness, this remote woodland, and the events that take place there that you slowly come to investigate as just gives you that kind of prickling of hair at the back of your neck that you're not quite sure if you're completely alone or whether you're completely safe, and it really just adds to the tension as you're playing through. And of course, there's also the voice chatter from your only connection in the outside world, which is a fellow ranger who is communicating to you through the walkie-talkie that you have. Throughout the game, you sort of steadily build a relationship with this stranger on the other end, and it all kind of feeds into this kind of feeling of paranoia. And of course, the choices that you end up making become sort of influenced by this. So I just wanted to reference that game because I think it's a very good example of its use of environment as its own character. It immerses you as the player, and it kind of just gives tension to those choices and interactions that you're making. And finally, one thing I think the game does well, and I think we can all learn from this as kind of interactive writers, is how the narrative is developed through exploration of the environment. So in the game, like, objects provide kind of clues that enable you to piece together kind of what is going on. For example, exploring an abandoned camp, you might find part of a journal, a child's crayon drawing, some footprints. You might discover a tape with a sort of audio recording. These are all things the player has to actively find and interact with, and it gives them some little nuggets of information and then leaves you to draw, to make the connections and draw your own conclusions. So, I mean, one of the big things that they always say about, writing is kind of show, don't tell. So rather than giving your reader a big info dump or lengthy exposition, think about how the reader can explore and learn about your story in different ways. And the environment itself can be a part of that, as discussed. So, readers can then feel sort of rewarded for, exploring, finding different objects, uncovering secrets, piecing together clues. And, that's just a really great way of having them feel involved in piecing together the story. So, to quickly recap, I'd say give your player choices so their own character can feel personal to them. Non-player characters should be there to challenge the reader. Try and avoid them being just window dressing. Give them their own personalities, their quirks, their flaws, and let the reader decide on the sort of relationships and friendships that they want to forge. Finally, environment. Use it to bring your world and story alive. Make each location memorable and interesting, and fill it with little nuggets of exciting lore, info, to kind of help tell your story and give more depth. So, yeah, that's it. I hope you found this useful. Thank you for listening. If you've got any comments or things you want to add to this discussion, then that would be great. Just leave a comment below. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button. I do appreciate it. And yeah, so I think following this, I'll probably be moving more into nitty-gritty of the difficulty of your game book, and also the kind of linking it all together. So so that'll be what I'll be moving on to next. Anyway, thank you for your time, and see you in the next one. Thank you.